and yeah, Descartes. Sounds like something you have like as an hors d'oeuvre.
Yes.
Sounds like something. Sounds like something you don't put before the horse.
Descartes.
Nice.
I'm gonna have my steak a la Descartes.
That's right.
or a very French cut.
Oh God. Hello, drunk duckers, and welcome to the QUACKCAST. This is QUACKCAST number 419. I'm Ozone Ocean, and with me is Baines. Hi, Baines.
Hello.
And Tance. Hello, Tance.
Hello.
Oh, fantastic. That's us three. Pitsy is not with us at the moment because she's driving and doing stuff.
She's not safe for work.
That's a pretty good segue there. So this week we're talking about ratings. This topic came to me because Emma Claire, our fantastic Emma Claire in Sydney, she did a news post on Friday about ratings, talking about the rating system. She used I think it's the Australian film ratings as an example, but globally, there's not that much difference between rating systems. So yeah, we'll talk about that in a QUACKCAST. Before we do that, we have to get into the feature. So the featured comic this week, a comic I featured, Sunstrike and Blue Mist, an origin story. So that's the full title. Sunstrike and Blue Mist, an origin story. So read it, or listen to me talk about it at least.
Do both.
Hello, I'm Ozone Ocean, and my feature for the week was Sunstrike and Blue Mist, an origin story. Kaoru Takeshi is a damn good field agent and a double agent to boot, but he's starting to have second thoughts about his divided loyalties. Evan and Kat are two super mutant kids, trying to keep their powers hidden and stay out of trouble, but they may not have to do that for much longer if the secret police hire them. Kat will finally be able to show herself to the world, just like she's always dreamed. Sunstrike and Blue Mist is a full-colour, digitally drawn superhero action drama. There's a good portion of action in this comic, and character development. I especially liked the deaf character and the prosthetic leg. There's a deaf character who gets mugged and has to sort of show that she's she's all right and stuff like that, and has to indicate that to these characters who can't actually understand her. That's good to include that kind of thing. And Kat has a prosthetic leg, which is quite an interesting aspect of her, which you don't normally see in a lot of comics. Some nice little touches with that kind of thing. The author is Charrose49. The comic is rated T, and yeah, Charrose sort of went off a bit on her own way to do these things, rather than sort of keeping with the old super perfect people who you normally see in a lot of mainstream comics, who only have their only faults are things like, I'm just so depressed about some relationship issue that happened a long time ago, or something terrible in my life. It's a pretty banal kind of relatable stuff, and this is a lot cleverer, I think, in trying to think of things like this anyway. So yeah, Blue Mist, Sunstrike and Blue Mist, an origin story. It's a good little comic. Kat is her name's short for Katana. So yeah, I rather called her Kat when I was doing the review. And she's got yellow skin like the Simpsons, but I think that's the an aspect of her mutation, and she has to cover that up with tattoo concealer when she's in public, so it doesn't sort of show. And the reason is it's because mutants are looked down on by people in that society, so they have to be very careful to stay under sort of below the radar because people ascribe atrocities and crimes to them. It's the same way people tend to do with Muslims and stuff like that. They'll say, oh, that person's, those mutants, they're responsible for these bad things because some, I don't know, 1 or 2 mutants might have caused some disasters to happen because obviously they got amazing powers and anything they do is, amplified far more above what normal people can do. Anyway, so they have to keep themselves concealed. They have been possibly recruited by this organization called the Secret Police. Now, the Secret Police, normally you'd think, oh my god, that has negative associations because Secret Police, they're normally bad people. But this is not affiliated with the government. This is like a non-affiliated, non-governmental organization. So they're a private organization, but they're just called the Secret Police, which is an interesting little kink. Anyway, so I hope you enjoy Sunstrike and Blue Mist, An Origin Story by Sharose49, rated T. And that was our feature, Sunstrike and Blue Mist, An Origin Story. Hope you enjoyed listening to me talk about it, and maybe you'll go and read it, because she really deserves more readers. It's a interesting superhero comic, a good take on the whole superhero thing. All right. The featured music Gumwallace has given us for this week. Now, this music is for the comic Blighted the Odyssey, which is an interesting title. So, the spirit of exploration taking you far out into the deep black starlit ocean. St. Elmo's fire glows around the mast and yards. Swirls of glowing plankton cling and drift away from the sides of the hull as you venture further into the unknown, disappearing into the darkness. So, take it away, Gumwallace, with Blighted the Odyssey. And that was our music. Thank you for that, Gumwallace. Blighted the Odyssey, which is a comic by Alfiere or Alfiere? I'm not sure. But yeah, nice sounding name. Rated M. So, Blighted the Odyssey. So guys, ratings, the rating system. Oh, damn it. I'm going to have to explain the rating system again for a third time. Oh my god.
Maybe let Baines do it this time.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because I've been talking over
I need you to run through it one more time so I get it.
Oh, damn. Well, I'll do it if... All right.
Well, how about can we read what Emma said? Does she run through it in her thing?
She's running through like the Australian rating system, which isn't the Drunk Duck rating system.
Okay, right, not the. Okay,
Yeah.
I should let you do the Drunk Duck one because I'll just be making it up.
All right, so on Drunk Duck we have 4 levels of rating. We have E for everyone, T plus, which means teen, M for mature, and A for adult. So what those mean functionally is E for everyone means that's content that little kids can read, and so you only want cartoon super stylized violence in there. You don't want like anything being with swear words or like vicious or sexual or suggestive. You want to cut all that out and make it all sanitized and clean for kids. All right, so next up we have the teen rating. So the teen one, you can be a lot more suggestive. You don't have full nudity or nudity at all, really. Or no, basically you don't have nudity at all, but you can be suggestive. So you can have people in tight clothes, all that kind of thing. That's perfectly okay. Like revealing clothes, as long as they don't actually reveal anything. You can have like one swear word, like every 50 pages, that kind of thing. Like keep the swear words to a minimum, but they can be included. Your violence isn't going to be too extreme. You're not going to show blood everywhere, any of that kind of stuff. So you can have a bit of violence, you can have a bit of suggestiveness, but you don't want to go above that because this is just teen rated work. Okay, so next up we have mature. Right, mature rating. Mature rating comes with a restriction, which means any people who are logged into the website and into Drunk Duck as kids cannot see the work. They cannot view it at all. So it's protected from them. Okay, mature work can include like full frontal nudity, but as long as your characters aren't nude all the time, you can have suggestive sex scene. You can have suggestive things. You can have a sex scene, but as long as you don't actually show anything going in any places, you don't want to be anatomical or anything like that. You can have violence, you can have blood, as long as you're not gore porn, you're not ridiculous level of violence. So you can be a lot more free, but obviously within limits. But it does come with the restrictions on viewership. A small restriction, but it's there. So next up we have the adult rating. So basically you can go carte blanche, whatever that word is. You can go all the way. You have a lot more freedom to show whatever you want, like in nudity all the time. Characters can be permanently nude. Violence, like full on, like blood, gore, all that kind of stuff. As long as you do not show anything that is illegal. And we're not talking about jaywalking or kidnapping, but things that are illegal to depict. We don't want that on the site. I'm not going to delve into that because you'll know what is illegal. You should, and if you don't, well, you're probably going to get into trouble anyway. Also, don't repost pictures of if you find pictures of violence or ISIS killing someone on the web. Don't put up that on the site because if you do, we're going to ban you. Okay, so don't do that. So just don't please. So that out of the way. Drunk Duck is one of the few comic sites, or one of the very few sites that is free sites where you can show have your porn webcomic on there, and we're not going to restrict you. So we're going to treat you like an adult, and you're free to do and show all that kind of stuff. Okay, so we are a site that is grown up, and we expect you to be grown up too. Yeah, but that does...
means responsible. That means we expect you to be responsible.
Exactly.
Consume responsibly.
That does come with a much bigger restriction, though, because people who are not logged into the site cannot see that work. You have to be logged in to Drunk Duck to see it. And kids who are logged into Drunk Duck also cannot see it, of course, obviously. So it's protected. So just be aware that you by having more freedom, you've got less freedom to show your work to people. So it's slightly limited, but it's a trade-off.
Yeah, I mean, I like that system personally. We're not banning people for content beyond extreme stuff like what you're outlining there.
Yeah,
I think it's a good approach, because you can do what you want. And but then we can sort of shield people who don't want to see that stuff, or by default probably wouldn't want to see that stuff.
Yeah, and it would get us into trouble anyway, our website.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
we have to be careful. We have to be responsible people. Yeah, so Drunk Duck is a site that allows quite a range of, and I think the full ratings is quite simple. Like modern movie and television ratings are just stupid. It's ridiculous. One of the big reasons that people don't talk about for modern movie ratings is the fact that these aren't necessarily driven by what a government agency says is right or wrong, or what like a focus group, or what laws say is right or wrong for people. These are actually movie promotional standards, because these are like a self-regulating thing. So the movie industry comes up with these standards themselves, which means the film ratings are designed a certain way in order to get the most viewership on things, and still allow their creators to have a bit of a range. So that's what film ratings are designed around. They're designed around viewership, as well as cultural standards. But the cultural standards and laws are secondary to viewership. So that's why they're so complicated. So they can sneak things through. So things that would normally be like in the old rating system, they might be further down or whatever. Now they can be NC-17 or MA-15 or whatever, and that's why there are so many, so they can sort of rejig it a bit. And the ratings have not really... The weird thing about those ratings is they've actually moved up. So there are... Like in the old days, cultural standards were a lot looser, so you could have like a sex scene, you could have violence and, a bit of blood and murder in a G-rated work, which is why if you look at movies from the 1970s, early 80s, they'll be a lot more violent than they are today, and they're a lot more sexy and suggestive. Now today, if something's going to be G-rated or whatever, K-rated or whatever for kids, it's going to be a lot more sanitized. Way more sanitized than in the old days. And they've actually split up the highest rating, which means they can get through a lot more things without it actually being like the highest rating, which is like A or X or something like that. So they can stick it in the rating below that so more people can see it. So that's why we don't do drunk duck ratings like film ratings, because those are not as sensibly sort of sorted out. Those aren't really for viewers as much.
I would also say that they are not always very consistent.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you will see, even if you don't compare and contrast with films that were made a few decades ago, which you could argue reflects a different era or whatever. But some films will get a rating that doesn't warrant certain things, and another film with the same content will get a completely different rating. So it's not necessarily always consistent. That's one thing. And the other thing is that you have a 3-hour tops film. So it's a very specific, narrow range about what you can and you can't do within these 2 hours. In a webcomic, which is usually a graphic novel, you may need more leeway and more room to juggle things. So you need broader categories that will remain far more constant than what happens with films.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because a lot of stuff can happen over like a 200-page comic. You can change the rating on your comic if you need to. Like if you start out as a T rating comic or the E for everyone rated comic, and you want to go and sell a bit more, you can change it. Or maybe you started out with an M rated comic, and then you find actually I'm not really doing M rated work. I'll rate it as T. You can do that. That's fine, as long as if you do have something that is warrants a high rating, you'll keep the rating that's appropriate. And it's Drunk Duck is a self-rated site, So you are responsible for your rating, and just be clever about it. Don't give yourself the wrong rating and be silly. And we're all happy.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And what we were discussing, because before having this discussion now for the podcast, for the Quack Chat, we also have for our patrons the video, which you can see if you become one. So what we were saying is that one practical change that could benefit the site would be to split up the adult level rating to signal why the particular content is adult, so that people don't immediately think of a sex, basically. That this is where I'm going to get my sex with this rating, and know that perhaps it is adult because it has very extreme, very graphic, and very explicit violence, or the themes are extremely explicit. Like, for example, I remember it wasn't a webcomic, but if it was in webcomic format, it would definitely need to be adult. There was this whodunit that I read. It was hard for me to finish it. It had no sex in it. Well, okay, it had a little bit, but that was really almost on a T, let's say, rating.
Yeah.
But the scenes where the serial killer was actually committing the murders were extremely hard to get through, because it was very detailed, to the point that you were creeped out by the writer. Like, this writer is enjoying this. Like, they are writing and they probably are getting off on it or something. But the point is that it was such an extremely detailed, graphic, faithful account of how the particular very ceremonial murder was taking place, that it would have to be adult. You couldn't have it on a mature rating.
Wow.
And it wouldn't be porn. Well, it wouldn't be that kind. It wouldn't be that kind of porn. It would be murder porn, maybe, but not sexual porn. So you would enter this, let's say, assuming that it is a webcomic, you would enter this webcomic ready to see sexy ladies, for example. Completely.
Yeah, you'd be very disappointed.
Yeah, like this. Like, what happened to your ears right now would be you getting blindsided by this comic.
Oh my god.
Is that you? Is that Oz?
That's definitely Oz.
What
He's
was?
shaving with his microphone.
Oh,
those are loud.
Sorry, I was just moving a cord and it's was it making weird noise? Was it?
Yeah.
Oh,
it was definitely making weird noise.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's all my cords are bloody tangled up everywhere, and okay, done. Sorry for that. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, you don't want people to be frustrated, especially if, for example, they invest and read 20, 30 pages and then realize that it's not going to get where they're expecting it to go. That only produces frustration. So there is no reason for that to happen. We could just have a rating that signals.
Well, that's a good idea. Yeah, I like the idea that we've only got 4 ratings and it simplifies things. But it is a good idea to split up like violence and sex into 2 different things, because in our society we violence is more acceptable than sex. So you could even get away with saying, okay, like you could have more extreme violence in M, but I'm not sure about that. It's probably better to. I mean, you could get away with that. You could say, okay, like you can have like your extreme violence as an M rating, and the A rating is just for sex. That could work.
Yeah, but again, it wouldn't be fair, I think. So you could have, like, we could have something like a an R rating for something that is adult but isn't sexual porn, and then adult for only sexual explicitness,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah. It's a good idea to consider to have that kind of split up because, yeah, as you say, sometimes you need to show like extreme violence and stuff like that, but you don't want to obviously do porn.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
Or you
that's
do.
the thing.
Yeah.
But I would consider, because I can actually change the rating descriptions, I think I would consider, like, tweaking them a bit and saying, okay, you can have more violence here, just do porn here.
Has it been an issue at those more adult levels on the Duck?
No, because it's really hard to define about violence.
Right.
Because, yeah, as I say, like in our society, violence is more acceptable. So how do you really define what's unacceptable? It's tricky.
But nothing has come to you, like nothing has reached you anyway, like people complaining or people having an issue.
No, people used to only complain about porn. Well,
right.
Not porn, but people would complain about nudity. Like they say, oh, I don't want to see this nudity on the front page, or someone's got, like, boobs in their thumbnail and I don't like it.
What? I can't believe anyone would do that.
Oh, that happened a lot. I won't say.
I know, that's what I'm saying. That's like everywhere on the internet.
Yeah, I won't say who or whatever, but that's fair enough. That what they were thinking of when they were complaining about it wasn't necessarily their own tastes. They were thinking of the site, and they were thinking, if Drunk Duck has this kind of showing on thumbnails on the front page, it's gonna give the site a bad image. So they were thinking of that. So yeah. And that's fair enough, because I come from a point of view with, like you say, that you see it everywhere on the internet, so it doesn't matter. But I suppose they're thinking of, okay, kids could be looking at the front page. We have kid-rated comics. Why would we have that on the front page? So yeah, I can see where they're coming from.
Yeah,
and every time I speak to the creators of those comics, and we resolve it, and they take they change their thumbnails, and yeah, everything is nicely sorted out. So yeah, works out for everyone. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of thing. It's because sex and violence are differently rated in comics. Did I talk about the whole children and adults thing in the video, or did I do that on the QUACKCAST? I can't remember.
I'm not sure either, to be honest.
Well, okay. If I didn't cover it, well, I'll just go into this. This is my silly rant about these things. Okay. In the old, a lot of our cultural mores and stuff like that about, what kids should see, what is safe for, society in general, are based on stuff from the last century or the century before the last century. It's, 19th century stuff. Basically, there used to be a lot more children in society. Children used to make up a far bigger proportion of the community. In the 21st century, children are a tiny minority of society. Most people are adults. There's hardly anyone who is in the G rating or kids rating, everybody rating, whatever it is, the lowest rating. They are the smallest possible audience. Most people are like adults, like, in their 20s. I think they make up the biggest proportion, and people like, above that. So yeah, if you're doing work aimed at teens and young adults and people who are like 30, 40 to 50, that's your biggest by far. Even in their 60s, that's the biggest audience by far. Kids are not as big a part of our population as a lot of people like to imagine. So all that stuff when you say, oh God, this isn't safe for kids to see, or this is ruining our children. That's all rubbish because there are less kids around. Most of the people
There's
who
only a couple dozen kids left.
It's just 5. Most people who consume media
It's just 5 kids.
are not
Yeah.
children. So yeah, that's a totally made up sort of problem. And I'm not imagining this or thinking, oh, I don't see many kids or whatever. This is like statistics. If you look at world statistics and birth rates and population what is it, demographics, census, then you'll see that's how it is. Like maybe in Africa, maybe in some places where birth rates are different, you'll see a different kind of demographic, but not in the Western world. And most first world countries, birth rates are fairly low. Kids don't make up a big percentage of the population, so we are wrong to consider sex such a bad thing in our culture. Well, I mean, we're wrong to consider it a bad thing when we use children seeing it as the justification, because that is a lot less likely to happen. So teen rating should be, a lot more free. That's all I'm saying.
And we're so prudish about it. That's why our birth rates are down.
I think
probably.
I would argue though that the percentage of the young population, like think of the children sort of thing, shouldn't be an issue, because if you have a minority of kids and everyone else is adult, then we don't care about the rating because it's for adults anyway. But sex in general and sexuality has always been, for all societies, something that is like a regulated substance almost. I don't think that will ever go away, because human popularity and also sexuality, and also human capacity to breed is very much related to socioeconomic elements of every different society. So you will still get some kind of rating for some kind of category that will be prohibited from being exposed to sexual behaviors on the screen or anywhere. So I don't think that it's an issue of being prudish or not. I think it's more a reflection of how much of a percentage of society is considered eligible to engage and partake in that kind of theme, let's say. But again, that's my opinion.
Well, yeah, there are a lot more people who are eligible than there are versus those who aren't. I'm not advocating that everything should be sexual. I'm just saying that we shouldn't use the think of their children argument as a justification, as some people are wont to do. And that's that's not for sexuality, that's for violence as well. And not just violence as violence sake, but showing things how they really are, and versus sanitizing things over, like the Disneyfication of things, say the Disney version of Cinderella or Beauty and the Beast, that kind of thing, where everything's incredibly, absolutely tame versus, a version
I would say that
not.
I agree with that, and usually they use the children as a fig leaf, so to speak, to hide behind that they want to actually regulate certain things. Because if you rate something that is not for kids, then the responsibility of the kids being exposed to it goes to the parents. And also the restrictions, like for example, you shouldn't let underage people into a theater if it's restricted to not having them anyway there. So usually when they say, think of the children or anything like that, it's for controlling the stimulus anyway, and not exposing certain things to the general population and not the kids per se. Or at least, again, that is my experience and opinion on that. I mean, you don't have to to take it to the bank, I guess.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. Yeah, you have, like in Australia, we had we were well known for being very strict on our film ratings, and a lot of films that were fine to be shown in other countries were absolutely outright banned in Australia because we didn't have a rating high enough. So you couldn't see hardcore pornography in Australia. Only like in funnily enough, you could only get like hardcore pornography in the Northern Territory because it wasn't a state. Like this is one of our biggest states, but it wasn't a state, it was a territory. So it meant like it didn't have the same laws as a state. And Australian Capital Territory, which is this tiny little it's hard to describe, tiny little pseudo state that only exists around our national capital. So our national capital, where our politicians live and do all the stuff in their parliament, you can get hardcore porn there, but nowhere else. And I think that's where they actually there were porn studios that were making pornography in the Australian Capital Territory, where all the politicians were, funnily enough. So yeah, but that's on the porn side. But films that were refused classification because they were too violent or whatever, like A Clockwork Orange was refused classification and outright banned in Australia. 120 Days of Sodom, whatever that's called. I think it's Sado. I think that's another name of it. That's another film that was outright banned. Yeah, so we had all of those because the ratings classification people who reviewed things, and they refused to give it a classification. So yeah, you're right. Classifications can be used to control people and what they see, and that's not only for like very violent things. That could be for films with a political message that they didn't want to get out. They could refuse those classifications. So yeah.
Speaking of such films, I think there was this one Pasolini film, around like the late 80s, early 90s, somewhere like that. It was broadcast in the quote-unquote mature zone, time zone for Greece, which was around like 10 in the evening. Kids were supposed to be in bed by 9 in those innocent times. So, and the broadcast, I think either the 100 or how many 100 days of Sodom.
Yeah, 100 days, 120 days,
whatever, some numbered days of Sodom, or what's the other one, or something with the sad. Anything. I don't remember. And people bombarded the prosecutor on call to get the movie to be interrupted from being broadcast, because it was so explicit and shockingly explicit for the times.
Yeah.
So the restriction came by popular demand, actually. In that
so
particular.
it was the people who decided rather than the classification rating board.
People said that what, this isn't for this time zone. They broadcast it at 2 a.m. or something like that. So there are some things. I think that there is always the Greece in general is very much in the logic of decency and balance, in a sense. These are the two words that are very much being used, and many would say that it is very prudish. But on the other hand, it's very much a cultural issue of the really extreme stuff that are 2 or 3 standard deviations, let's say, from the mean, are supposed to be viewed in private, whatever they are. Okay. So again, you have a cultural element in that respect, where people just don't want to be communally exposed to certain things. So it really comes down a lot to culture when it comes down to ratings.
It does. That's why the ratings are different in every country. That's why we can't say, okay, let's just take the American rating system and, say like NC-17, blah, blah, blah. Because every country makes its own version of the ratings based on its culture and what is appropriate in that culture. And that can be very different. Like in China is far more restrictive politically and socially than a lot of other places. So there's a lot less they can show in films and get a general rating than what you can show in America, which is far more open. And in European films, it's traditionally known a lot of European films were far more looser and explicit in the things they would show. So, like the famous...
Yes. And again, it's also in the genres, if I pronounced that right. For example, you could have, again, speaking from the experience I have of Greek films, you could have super political things being broadcasted, okay. Of course, we're not talking about junta times, we're talking about post-junta times. But you could have very, very political subject matter and content being broadcast, and very scathing commentary that doesn't really count for any sort of restriction being broadcast, okay. And you could have things that would be maybe in other countries considered even artistically sexual, be considered very extreme and not to be shown, not in general, but in certain time zones. They were not for certain time zones. So again, the ratings reflect very much what the society culturally is prone to tolerating or not.
And what's
assuming we don't have a dictatorship in place. In China, I think it's more that they have this dictatorship in place than their culture.
Yeah, and the other thing I don't know if we mentioned on the actual QUACKCAST or whether we did it in the video, is that film ratings are based, they're usually a mixture of self-regulation and also some governmental regulation and what the culture will tolerate. So it's a mixture of those things. The film people want to get out and show people things that they want to see. So that's their goal. And they will do that to within whatever ratings they can get away with showing. And it's usually a self-regulation system, so they will set up their own ratings, but sometimes in consultation with some sort of government ratings board, like we have in Australia, probably in Greece as well. So it's usually a battle. That's why you have ridiculous ratings like NC-17 and whatever. It's so you can scrape by and show more adult, more violent things, which the audience wants to see. The audience wants to see sex and violence, and those ratings allow them to do it without it going up to the highest rating, which means it's more restricted, and which means you cannot show it in as many cinemas and sell as many DVDs as you'd like, and all that kind of thing. So it's always that. It's the same, like Drunk Duck is a good microcosm, because if you have something A-rated, it won't be seen to people who aren't logged into the site. So that kind of thing. It's the same with movies. If you increase the ratings, then you can't show it broadly. It changes over time. Like in the 1970s, famously, a film Deep Throat was shown in commercial cinemas. They had screenings, they had screening parties. So it wasn't shown to children, but it was shown like in public cinemas. These days, you couldn't show that in public cinemas. It's a different thing. The only public cinemas you could show like a hardcore porn film like that in would be like alternative sort of artistic kind of hipster kind of things they could get away with it. But back then, no, it wasn't that. You could do it in like mainstream public cinemas. So it was, yeah, things do change over time. And that's a point I think I made in the video. I'm not sure. Triple X. But I think I made that in the point of the video is that I might not have. Okay, so often when people... One of the biggest criticisms people made about the people who did not like the Star Wars prequels. So, okay, the Star Wars prequels were very sanitized. They were very aimed at children and not cleverly aimed at children because they had a lot of concepts that would bore children to absolute tears, all that politics and all that stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But they were very aimed at children and very sanitized, incredibly so, in a kind of kiddie kind of ridiculous way. And when people complained about that, people would come back with the claim that, oh, but the original Star Wars had this low rating. It was aimed for kids. Look at that. That had a low rating too. But that completely ignores the reality that in the 1970s, when that film was done, ratings were different. You could show violence. You could show people being killed. You could show blood. You could show sex scenes. You could show suggestive sexual situations, nudity, in films that were rated more generally for everyone to see. And that was the time when those films were created. So it's a different time. So those films were not aimed at children. They were aimed at a general audience, and that's what general audiences saw.
Yeah.
So that just illustrates that things change.
Imagine like even Disney in Fantasia, which was, when did it come out? I think was it in the 50s or the 60s,
I think
somewhere?
so, the 1950s, yeah, you're probably right.
And again, I think the rating is for a general audience, but it has this night on Bald Mountain.
Oh, the
towards the end.
famous satanic devil scene.
Yes, and it has devils, and it has devils with boobs, like
Oh my
nipples.
God.
Wow, yeah.
You can actually see nipples there.
Wow.
And it passed. It was okay. And it was Disney.
There you go,
Right.
Yeah. Things change. So it's not a consistent thing with ratings. But yeah, you have to remember that when you see things that are rated a specific way, that does not mean your little tiny child is going to be safe watching. Well, it's going to be safe watching whatever, but yeah, there are going to be suggestive and adult things in all the films with more general ratings, because ratings are not some kind of gold standard of how things are. They're based on the culture of the time, of when it was produced. So, and they're a commercial thing. They aren't necessarily about what is safe for your child to see. It's about what film promoters can get away with and still have things falling within the broadest rating for the biggest audience. So that's a thing you have to consider. It's more of a commercial thing than, I would say, a cultural thing, in that it's done because of the culture, but it's done because it needs to be because of the culture. That's what they need to do to get around, cultural taboos and things like that. That's why they have the ratings. So yeah, I mean, Australia was very much quite a prudish society in what we would allow and what we wouldn't. And then again, we were not consistent. A lot of films were banned or refused classification, even for having like a full frontal nudity. No sex, but full frontal nudity. But then, say in the 1970s, we had sitcoms that were on TV that had full frontal nudity. So even while they were banning films, they did that. And in the 90s, that went away in the 80s, but came back in the 90s. So there are dramas on TV only shown, after like 10 o'clock at night or whatever, but full frontal nudity. So, yeah. And still not really allowing that very much in films. That was still extremely rare. Even films that did have full frontal nudity, that would be in the Australian release, that would be like cut out. So yeah, it can be inconsistent, as that point you made, Tance. That's very good.
Listening to what you're describing, I'm thinking that perhaps there is also a shift in consideration about who has the responsibility for what, in the sense that perhaps in older times you had films with more content that would now be considered adult, being classified with, for example, a mature-ish rating, let's say, and be broadcast on general TV, but in time zones that were considered that, adult audiences would watch. Whereas now, this doesn't happen so much. And perhaps in the earlier times, people expected, the parenting to be done by the parents. And if your kid watched this racy movie, for example, that was broadcast at midnight, it was your fault and not the movies, for example.
Yes.
Because you know what we were getting into. Whereas now there is a discrepancy, like I would say a dissonance, in the sense that we get movies being very sanitized, because think of the children that might be exposed randomly because parents are clearly not there. And but on the other hand, you also have reality shows, for example, that are very questionable in content, and they show patterns of behavior that actually are very toxic to society in general. I mean, they shouldn't be allowed.
It shouldn't be allowed for anyone. They should be banned.
Yeah, actually, there are some things that if I was in that kind of ministry, I would definitely ban them from general TV, because the behavioral patterns that they show are for garbage people. Like they teach you
Garbage
how
people. It's true though.
they
It's true.
teach you how to be a garbage person, and no, don't.
And Tance is
But
talking human garbage rather than a person who actually collects garbage for a living. So.
That's not a garbage person. That's a garbage collector.
Yes, exactly.
But oh my God! But okay, that's digressing. But I'm saying that they will show like a reality show where women will be basically whoring themselves out, and men again will be again doing the same, and that's fine. It's rated everyone, and then you have a side boob in a movie, and then everyone loses their their marbles over it.
Exactly. Weird double, triple standards that shouldn't exist. And just back to the other point before, there are less children in the developed world than there have ever, been for probably ever. And back in the old days, there were a lot where we expected parents, to do the work, and they did. There were less restrictions when there were more children. So that's weird. But I think actually most parents are more protective these days of children. And I don't think it's because, it's the that point about we expect the film people to do the parenting because the children won't. We do, but the reality is the parents are forcing the films to do that because they're so protective. So they're saying, you have to be, you have to be censoring all this, you have to make it appropriate for my child. And because the parents are so protective, they're actually, going through the films and wanting to make sure the content is absolutely safe. Which, yeah, they're being far too overprotective, over-vigilant about.
Dropping the ball somewhere because, those reality shows, guys.
Right, well, it's on TV, and TV is traditionally just meant to be fine. So yeah, TV gets a pass for the few people still watching it.
Yeah.
Should be listening to a podcast. Jeez, what the hell's wrong with you? Well, let's get back to talking about the ratings on comics. So, it's usually best to do like the midpoint, like for films. Go the mid ground. Give yourself a bit of freedom, but not so much that you're going to restrict where you can display your work. So, like we said before, Drunk Duck is happy to have your porn comic and your ultra-violent comic. That's fine, but you're not going to be able to print it. So, if you're going to do that kind of comic, then you're making life harder for yourself because you won't be able to sell it as easy. You're going to have to censor it. You're going to have to pull out panels and change writing, take out all the swear words and stuff like that. It's going to be harder for you to do. And a lot of the time, that stuff's pretty essential to your comic. Maybe it's something like Tank Girl, where it's full of that kind of stuff. And, yeah, you can't show it as freely as you could with more general stuff. Then again, if you're doing really general stuff, you might find that a bit of a straitjacket. And it's really hard to work within those, constrictions, those restrictions. It just is quite difficult. So, like Baines, you decided to do an M rating for Typical Strange, so you had freedom. So you had a bit of a wiggle room. Basically, it's the stretch pants of the ratings.
Yeah, exactly. It's the elastic waistband that I put on my pants and my comic.
So yeah, Typical
So
Strange.
I was I don't know if I've ever strayed into the M category technically. These aren't ironclad things necessarily, but yeah, I sort of thought if I do, like I was new at posting comics too. I didn't know what I was doing, so I was like, well, it's either teen or M. I thought I'll give myself a little leeway. M felt like maybe a PG-13 when that existed, or like maybe a light R. So I was like, well, I'll just give myself that. That way it doesn't go out of bounds to who knew how strict the site was. I didn't know at the time. So yeah, and I yeah.
Now you
and
know
I don't
me
know if I've
and
ever.
you know it's a joke. So
Yeah.
For me, it felt like the description felt of the M. I remember reading them very carefully when I was making Wolf. I felt, oh wow, M is probably for like 17 plus, and
Right.
I'm not doing that. So I was extremely stressed out about whether T or T plus would be correct. Nobody ever bothered me. So yeah.
it is that sort of thing, isn't it? I mean, yeah, it's hard to define that level of violence and suggestiveness for the T. And like I think I said before, Pinky TA is a T rating, and I think it just scrapes into that because it doesn't really show. Like, I've covered up any kind of real nudity Pinky TA had, I think. I've tried pretty hard to do that. And I took out a lot of the swear words and stuff. So I did try and censor it as much as I could. To try and get it there. And I don't really show, like, really brutal violent stuff happens off screen, even though it can be a bit of a grittier kind of thing. Like Baines said, grittier tone, I do try and stay within, the bounds of decency. But for Bottom's Waitress, we want a lot more freedom. We're not showing explicit sex or anything like that, but we have the freedom to show a lot more things without having to worry about censorship.
Yeah.
So yeah, although I do sort of with Pinky TA, if I did want to show more violence, because it is a war comic, and horrific things happen in war, and if I do want to do that, I will have to change the rating. So I am aware of that, but I'm happy with showing really bad stuff off screen. I think I do sail close to the line in some instances. Like a guy gets his throat cut. Someone gets stabbed. I think someone gets shot in half with a gun. But it's
I think, yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I interrupted you, but yeah. I think that it depends really on how much blood you saw squirting out, to a very big extent, and how much time you spend showing it happen.
Yeah, that's true. It's like only one panel kind of for each instance rather than sort of extending it, like being very pure. It's not purient about that kind of stuff. It's like, you know, violent stuff happens, but it's not something I'm going to focus on. Yeah, people being burnt to death and all that kind of stuff. But, yeah. I mean,
Exactly.
I'm managing the site and I decide what the ratings are. So yeah, suck it. No, not at all. I'm not. I think just as much about the ratings and what should fit into them as anyone else. You know, when I'm creating the work, when I'm doing stuff, and I'm very aware of it. And it does worry me when I show certain things, whether it sticks within the level. And I think it just does. And Drunk Duck has traditionally been a rather relaxed site and a pretty open site. So we don't want to say, oh, you should change this rating to an M now, and change that to an A. Oh, we're really worried about that. It's only if it really is an obvious A or an obvious M. We're not going to force you to change your ratings.
I think generally Drunk Duck is a site for adults, in the sense that people that are of age and they know more or less where they stand with their creations.
Yeah.
Even though, you can have kids accounts that are protected from certain ratings and everything. I think mostly the demographic is people that are of age and know what it is that they are making, and they are not interested in mislabeling anything, because the audience they are going for anyway isn't going to be anywhere beyond the limits of that particular rating, so it's fine.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the readership and our the creators on the site reflect the demographics of society. So we're mostly people between 20s and like 50s kind of thing. So people aged between 20 and 50 and everything in between there. That's our main users of the site. So it's adults, it's people who know what they're doing. There's a lot less teens and kids on the site. There are some, and we do definitely cater for teens and kids.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of comics that are kept clean, and the creators rate their work responsibly. So yeah, we do cater for that, no matter what we've been saying about being relaxed and allowing violence and sex and all this. We're completely aware that these cultural standards do exist for a lot of people. For all of us exist within the same cultural matrix. So we are not outside of it, and we definitely understand that kids deserve their stuff without having all that adult stuff, and adults deserve their stuff without you being restricted.
Mm-hmm.
And the other point I was just thinking of is what we said before about film ratings being different in different countries, slightly because you've got slightly different cultures. Drunk Duck is a website, or the Dark Web Comics is a website, and people from all over the world can see it. So the Drunk Duck ratings sort of reflect that they are pretty general and loose, because all of the world has different, cultural taboos and mores and stuff like that. So.
And I think that we go very much in the safe quote-unquote direction of giving the limits that would be internationally acceptable.
Yeah.
So-and-so is A, so-and-so is M, and so on and so forth. And people know the risks, quote-unquote, of the comics that are on the fringes of these ratings, that they know that, okay, the main, like the general mean of this rating will be like that, but I will have a deviation of sorts towards the upper level and the lower level, and I have that in mind, and it's fine. So nobody, I mean, I have personally, in all my years in this site, I have never seen anyone protest that, oh my God, I went to this rating and I was shocked and my eyes burned, and what are you doing? Like, I have never seen this. I have never seen anyone complain about mislabeling the rating of a comic.
Yeah. I know one person who changed.
Oh.
Of course, Kim Luster is not around these days. Hopefully she'll come back. But when she was doing the God Strain, she changed her comics rating mid-run because I guess she had a neighbor, I think it was, or something, who her kids were reading it, her teen kids were reading it, and I guess it was getting a little bit intense. If Kim Luster was around, we could have asked her, like, what? I don't remember what the subject was, but I guess the subject matter was getting kind of intense. It was getting touchy, and she actually had someone in person talk to her about it. And Kim Luster disagreed, I think, but she was like, well, yeah, just, I'll just change it.
Yeah.
Change it up to make sure.
Have some sexuality in her comic, so
it might have been that, yeah. Probably. Like you said, generally people are more worried about that than violence. So.
Yeah, that's just one of the facts that we have to live with.
That's the way it is.
Yeah, that happens. There've been a lot of people who are concerned about their own work, and they change the ratings. And Scorpius, I think that's his name. This great guy. He does Nouveau Genesis. Damn it! I know the comics so well. Nouveau Genesis. He's been quite worried about the ratings on his comic and where he could show it. What was his name? Dunbogo, I think, is his what he's turned it into now, and that is basically cannibal holocaust. So
okay, yeah. It's pretty intense.
Yeah, full on that version of the work. But Drunk Duck is one of the few places he can show it. And he's been happy to be, move back to Drunk Duck and put his work on the site so he can, show his work that way. But he's always been very concerned about what people are allowed to see.
I'm very proud, and I had nothing to do with establishing these ratings or whatever, but I must admit, I'm very happy that we are that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And just a thought to mention that if anyone feels like, for example, that mostly the comic I'm making is, for example, M, but there is something that pushes it to borderline adult or something like that. You could put a content warning on your personal webpage, like say this is rated M and there is alert because there will be this theme, for example.
Yeah.
Or explicit this or explicit that. So people can know what they're getting into without you having to change your rating. Because if it's just one pattern that you feel might tip the scales just a little bit, not completely, then it could be basically M with this particular alert. And for example, Sarah N, who used to be on the DAC, but now she has her own personal site. She's making a vampire comic called Daniel that is definitely M. Yeah. And she has a series of warnings for specific themes that could, for some people, make this adult, so that they will know not to enter if they don't want that sort of thing. But it's generally, and it doesn't go too far with anything, but it will allude to where things are actually in the comics reality, even though they are not necessarily displayed, let's say. So, yeah, you could do that. You could have a warning, like, for example, torture warning, or self-hurt warning, or suicide warning, or things like that.
Trigger warning. We won't
Yes.
call them that. But,
I have those
yeah.
warnings on my comic just because the art is so bad.
You should stop, being so self-deprecating.
Falsely self-deprecating. Yeah. Yes.
Oh,
It is
God.
true though.
But
That touches on.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, yes.
No, go
on. Just something. People know this, I guess, but someone might not think this way. The way to use ratings is not really to be like put yourself in restrictive categories necessarily. It's a matter of also of finding your audience. Finding your right readers. Sorry, and I don't know if you guys touched on this when I was away. I had to step away there briefly, but to sort of clue in the right readers for your comic that this is for you, or this is not for you. I appreciate a comic, any rating, talking a little bit about what their subject matter is in the description.
I agree.
This is going to be a girl and girl, blah blah blah, or this is a scenes of explicit violence, or whatever. Like the people will put that kind of stuff just to warn you that like this is not for you, or maybe like this is for you.
Yeah.
So that's a way to sort of add to your ratings and like sort of find the people who are really going to like what you're doing.
That's true. When you see an A-rated comic on the Dark, you usually expect there's going to be sex in that comic.
Yeah, but not necessarily. Yeah, people might talk
not
about
necessarily,
like
but usually
this is blood and guts. This is not sex. Some people will do that, and I think that's a pretty smart thing to do.
A good way of doing the whole rating thing, because we do webcomics. Our webcomics scroll vertically. Typically, they can scroll horizontally, but whatever. Which means you can have like the top half of the page being the warning, and then you can scroll, and it will have the thing that you're worried about. So you can do that for a specific page. So if you're worried about the violence or the suggestiveness of a page, you could just make it double the length and have the top half be a warning.
So, yeah, this page is NSFW.
Exactly.
This page is...
Which that people are forced to see that before they scroll up and actually see the work. So and if they don't want to see it, they just click the next button and go to the next page. So,
and a lot of creators are very cool about that. They really like warning people. I notice that a lot. That's very courteous of people. Just letting you know.
Yeah, some people will even
this might be for you, it might not, but here's your warning.
Some people will do a work safe version of their comic and a not safe version. That's been done.
Yeah.
There are also the work safe, not for work. I've seen that. And say someone like Lothar, who used to do, very sexy work, he did all sorts of amazing creative warnings on his profile and the comic itself, so you couldn't actually go to see the comic until you've read through all the warnings, which is an interesting. I thought it was a bit of overkill, but he was concerned about people complaining and being shocked. So, yeah, good for him.
Yeah, like people don't want to be off-putting. That's a natural thing for a lot of people. It's like, I want the people who want this to actually look at it. Like, they're not looking to trick people because, like, it's pointless. Right?
Yeah, basically, webcomickers are not like unsolicited dick pic guys. Very much solicited.
Yeah.
We're a different breed. Oh, God.
Two different,
Oh, man. Oh, yeah, I can just see the cover image. No, I will not do anything involving that as the cover image for the QUACKCAST. No. I'd have to censor myself. All right. Well, we've gone a bit over time, but this has been enlightening. I hope this helps people with the whole ratings thing. You know, like Bane said, it can be a promotional tool as well as something you do to be courteous and kind and all that kind of stuff. All right. This has been the Drunk Duck QUACKCAST number 419.
The rating game.
Oh, that's the title.
Couldn't come up with anything.
Awesome. Yes.
Tried to think of something more clever, but I couldn't. But
that is the title. Okay, thank you. All right, bye-bye, people.
Bye.